Hello, everybody. This is Seth Weissman, and welcome to another episode of Safe Real Estate. We are seeing lots of buyers not fulfilling their obligations at the moment and walking away from contracts. And one of the most common questions I am being asked is, how does the seller get the property back on the market safely? And can the seller put the house back on the market while the buyer number one and the seller may be fighting over earnest money? And the answer is, what the seller should always be doing before relisting the property is terminating contract number one. And the best way to do that is to simply fill out GAR Form 522, which is the unilateral termination form. And what the seller should say is that the seller is terminating due to the buyer's breach of the agreement. Now, if the buyer does not show up at the closing at 10:30 in the morning, the seller should wait until the next day to send in or to fill out a termination agreement, because in theory, the buyer does have a right to unilaterally extend the contract for 8 days, and they can do that at any point on the day of closing. So the seller does not want to terminate prematurely, but the very next day, the seller is now in a position to terminate the contract. And if the seller wants to relist, the seller should fill out that form, deliver it to the buyer, and they are then done with buyer number one. A lot of sellers are worried or nervous about filling out that form on the theory that maybe they will lose some rights against buyer number one if they terminate. And the answer to that is no, they don't lose any rights. They simply have ended that contract so that they can go on to a different contract. They still can claim the entire earnest money because, after all, the buyer has breached the contract. That gives the seller a lawful right to terminate, but the seller wants to terminate to avoid the buyer coming back later saying, I am now ready to perform. I am now ready to cure my breach, which could lead to a scenario where you now have two buyers competing for the same property. So again, the rule of thumb should always be, when the buyer breaches the contract, the seller wants to terminate before they move on to contract number two. I hope this episode of Safe Real Estate has been beneficial. As always, it's great to see you. Please continue to tune in. Thank you now.